in the British Caribbean. Essentially, the Chagosians became contract employees, and you can read this on the British Indian Ocean Territory website. This is official British government information. And basically, the contract workers were not permitted to own land or houses. They had no rights, even after abolition. And they essentially existed on the coconut plantations on the Chagos Islands, and they were told to go wherever the plantation owners needed them, even after abolition. So, on top of this crime against humanity that was enslavement, you then have the second crime against humanity when, because the Americans want Diego Garcia as a military base, the Chagos Islands, the Chagosians are summarily moved, and as the record shows, in Whitehall, memos are written to try to disguise the fact that they had ever even been settled on the island. So, to me, this is a double crime against humanity, enslavement followed by the forced removal of the Chagosian people. The Chagosians deserve an apology, they deserve reparations, they deserve the right to go to their homeland. The pain for Olivier and the roughly 2,000 other people who were forcibly removed within living memory. It is quite clearly a manifest injustice, and I would say that if a family, in the case of the Trevelyan family, can apologise for enslavement and pay reparations, then so can the British government for the Chagosian people.
Thanks, Laura. Clive.
Thank you. Hope the microphone's working. And thank you very much for inviting us here. It's an honour to be speaking with Olivier and Laura. And I just want to summarise briefly what Human Rights Watch found in our report on the crimes committed against the Chagosian people earlier this year. We found there were 3 crimes against humanity that have been committed against the Chagosian people. Crimes against humanity is not a term you can use lightly. It's the worst crimes known to humankind. But there are 3 which come from the forced displacement of the entire population of the Chagos Islands by the United Kingdom and the United States in the 1960s and 1970s. The 50th anniversary of the final deportation was just earlier this year. The first crime against humanity is the forced deportation itself. There's no justification for it. This has been eloquently documented by Olivier and many of the Chagosians. It was based on lies. It's been shown in the record. It was based actually on the United Kingdom wanting to lie to the United Nations in this building to avoid having to report about its rule over a population in a colony. And this is forced displacement is a crime against humanity. The second crime is related, but it's one of persecution on the grounds of race. And again, not a conclusion to come to lightly, but it's a very clear indication that the Chagosians are treated the way they were because of who they were, because they are the descendants of Africans, of enslaved Africans largely, and South Asians. And this is written in blatantly racist language by British officials in the 1960s and 70s, but also in the way that other islanders in the UK, overseas territories, or near US bases are not treated the same way, that they happen to be descendants of Europeans. The third crime against humanity, which is continuing now, is the failure, the prevention of the Chagosians from returning home. Even though the United Kingdom and this year the United States have admitted their regrets from the way they've been treated, they still prevent the Chagosians from returning home. Most of the islands are abandoned and isolated. The one island, Diego Garcia, where the US military base is half of that is unoccupied. So there's no reason why the Chagosians couldn't return home. There's just been a barrier put in force, formally by the UK and probably informally by the US on Diego Garcia. But now, as has been mentioned, extraordinarily there's negotiations ongoing between the UK and Mauritius, supposedly to fulfill that International Court of Justice advisory opinion. a few years ago. Those negotiations may be coming to a head now. There could be an announcement any day, probably before the end of the year. But what will be key is that those negotiations don't overlook the Chagosians again, that the Chagosians have a full part in decisions about them, and that reparations in this case have 4 elements. The first is that the Chagosians have the right to return home, including Diego Garcia, that whatever comes out of any new arrangement is that their right to return home is finally acknowledged by all governments, and that's the right of every Chagosian anywhere in the world. The second is that the islands are restored by the UK and US, so the Chagosians can live there. This is to right the harms that were done, so they don't just return to the wilderness or wasteland, but that right is, the islands are made right to live in. The third is financial compensation to an adequate degree, not the small amounts which have been given in the past to some Chagosians, to address all the harms, physical, material, psychological, and that has to be agreed with the Chagosians, not something that's given as aid or assistance. And finally is the idea of the satisfaction and understanding, the guarantee by the UK and US that this could never happen again. And that does mean that Chagosians have asked for a meaningful apology. As we said in our report, it would be an appropriate time for King Charles of the United Kingdom to issue an apology to ensure this would never happen, because the Chagosians were actually kept from their homes by an order in council, the Privy Council, issued by the former Queen Elizabeth herself on behalf of the British government. So that's today, and this is why it's an urgent issue today. And this is, as we said, an ongoing colonial crime, but a crime that could end tomorrow and should. Thank you.
Thanks, Clive. Before we open for questions, perhaps I could just sort of probe the judicial processes that are underway, and there have been various, including the ICJ opinion in 2019. But as far as I know, Mauritius is a party to the Rome Statute, as is the United Kingdom. Is there a role for the International Criminal Court here, given your determination that this is a crime against humanity?
What we've said is the first stage would be for national judicial institutions to investigate. And that, given it's a crime against humanity, it should be for the British judicial system to investigate. We've seen no sign of that, so we're seeing if there will be any movement on that now they're presented with the evidence. It's been very rare that such justice has addressed such historic crimes. But yes, ultimately, as you've said, the ICC would have jurisdiction over these crimes against humanity, given it's an ongoing crime.
And Olivier, given that we're 5 decades into this conversation, talk about your blood pressure and levels of frustration at how slowly this process has moved. Who's in the main to blame here? Is it the UK or the US? Is it the slow-moving General Assembly? I mean, why has this process not moved forward at a requisite rate?
Yeah. Our concern as people, being myself born on Chagos, I, together with all those people who have suffered and faced with all these kind of difficulties, because comparing life on Chagos to Mauritius, where most of us have been sent, but we don't forget also we have our brothers and sisters who have been sent in Sherwin. Life was very different because the type of living was very simple and were very peaceful and harmonious, because everyone has his job, everyone has his house. We have our culture, we have our tradition, and let me tell you that our culture has been recognized by UNESCO as music, as a worldwide heritage, need to be safeguarded. And our concern is we left over, we have been obliged to left over, because with the forcibly removed, we have our parents buried there. In any fate we are in this world, how could you not pay tribute to all your parents? We did not have access to the grave of our parents. And I give you my example. I just know from newspaper that there are job possibility in Diego Garcia on the base. I make application. I never been selected. And you know the reason why? Because of my place of birth. And if you look at wherever we have a US military base, we have local people giving priority. But instead, for Chagosian, it's not the case. That means this is why we say, is it correct or incorrect? Because it's not the way of doing people. And what is very difficult to accept, how could other people can have the right to live and to stay, to work on our birthplace, whereas we, as native, we don't have this opportunity. And if we just have a look on the International Court, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you said clearly that everyone has the right to live on his birthplace. Taking the case of Guantanamo, even it's known one of the famous secret base for US, we have people there cohabiting. And we always say that we have never asked for the closure of the US military base. We say that, live and let us live, and give this opportunity to Chagosian to live. At the same time, we can just care about the grave of our parents on Diego Garcia, Correspondents, and Sherwin. And it is what we are asking. Just put an end to our suffering. We are people who have been suffered for many years. And those countries who are supposed to give example to the world, they continue to banish the fundamental rights and the dignity of our people.
Laura, since you mentioned reparations and your own family's experience in terms of Grenada, how are those conversations, how difficult are those conversations, right? What numbers are we thinking about here when we talk about reparations to the Chagosians? And who's going to pay it?
Well, in the case of the Chagosians, it would clearly be the British government, because it was the British government who forcibly displaced the Chagosians. And as Clive said, there's clearly a paper trail with regard to that. But what Olivier just so eloquently spoke of there, how do you quantify the pain of not having access to the grave of your parents? How can you put a financial cost onto that? No amount of money will ever make up for those lost visits to pay tribute to your ancestors. So it isn't just financial. That's what I learned in Grenada. Although the financial part of it is extremely important. In the case of the Caribbean, the British underdeveloped the Caribbean. The societies today are extremely reliant on industries like tourism, where the major owners are multinational corporations. You know, that these industries provide employment, but much of the money is leaving the islands even to this day. So I think in the case of the Chagosians, and as Clive said, the figure for reparations is incredibly important, and it's one to be discussed with the Chagosians, but it isn't just about money. How can you make up for this pain, this agony? And therefore that's why the apology is in part 4 of what Clive was talking about. And I would love to hear Olivier speak about the importance of apology. What I found in Grenada was that people came up to me after we apologized. And by the way, a lot of people were not receptive to the apology. At least one of the 3 Rastafarian tribes in Grenada felt that it wasn't appropriate at all for us to suddenly turn up on their island and apologize, that this was wildly inappropriate. But many people came up to us and said, a burden that we didn't even know we were carrying has been lifted. So in the context of the transatlantic slave trade, where this has been happening for hundreds of years, and people in the Caribbean, because their ancestors were brought there, there's an importance in acknowledging that. With the Chagosians, not only do you have the pain of enslavement, but you have this very real, brutal act from 50 years ago, where they've been ejected from their home and not allowed back. So the double tragedy is really what Olivier represents, and it's extremely important, as Olivier said, for the US and the UK, which do represent human rights and the rule of law. We're not talking about China here. We're talking about countries that should be able to acknowledge what happened, and should be and are in a position, as the wealthiest countries in the world, amongst the wealthiest countries, G7 countries, to do something about it.
As a South African, I'll say apologies do matter, but we are in 2023, so you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. So that's just kind of the world we live in today. Do you want to talk a bit about the apology and the type of apology you want?
It's concerned, I think that in priority, the responsibility is for UK, but together with US, because without the presence of the US military base, people will continue to live on Chagos. But unfortunately, the responsibility is between UK, US and UK, because since they installed the US military base, we have been forcibly removed, and we face with many difficulties. We know about discrimination. When I talk about discrimination, how could it be possible that other people can have access on our place? It's not for us. This is something that we want to ask, because the main responsibility is, the base is for US, together with UK, but employment is being given by US government. I would like to mention, since 1992, we just wrote a letter to the then Secretary of United Nations to ask him about the situation of the Chagosian. But unfortunately, the reply we got is that they cannot take it into consideration, because as individuals we need to be supported by state. What we did with Mauritius, it's not only the issue of sovereignty, but the issue of human rights, because our fundamental rights had been ignored, had been banished for so many years. And this is why we think that reparation, of course, it's not only that we have been forcibly removed and sent in exile in Mauritius, but we have other things that which happened to us. The way that we were forced, it was difficult for us to integrate in Mauritian society. And it was difficult for us to accept that our place of birth, our children, our grandchildren did not get access. And as you know, there is a big sum of money being paid by the US to the UK, and we never been heard about that. I give you one example of UK. They just since 2016, they present a support package of 40 million pounds sterling to improve the condition of living of every Chagosian, wherever they are, in Mauritius, in UK, and in Seychelles or elsewhere. Up to now, brothers and sisters, nothing had been done to improve the condition of living of Chagosian. The main objective, they just only want for us to forget about our birthplace. I can mention that they even go ahead to give full British citizenship to all our descent, those who want to come to settle in UK. You know, we were born in a place. We should understand if the place was inaccessible for anyone. How could we accept that others can live and we don't have the right? And now you invite me to come to settle at your place, and you prohibit me to live on my place. Is it correct? Is it fair? This is one thing that I want people to know. And I just want also United Nations to care about. Because there is a resolution being voted by the United Nations General Assembly, who condemn, who say clearly, to stop the illegal occupation of the British government, British soldiers there, and of course to give this opportunity to Chagosian to return back to Chagos. Because most of our people, instead of finding a solution for people who have been faced with many difficulties, born from Chagos, there is given opportunity to our descent just to forget about the story. How could we forget where we come from? How could we forget the place where we were born? Did we have the right as all human beings? This is the question that we ask.
All right, seeing some hands over there. Should we start with Valeria, please?
Thank you so much. It's Valeria Robeco from UNCA News Agency, and thank you for the briefing on behalf of UNCA. So, do you trust Mauritius to negotiate for negotiation in your behalf? Do you think this is a doable road?
No, we cannot trust Mauritius, but what we say, instead of nothing, because we have to be thankful to Mauritius, because Mauritius gives us this opportunity. Because as mentioned, as individual, it will be never possibility for us to address to unite the International Court of Justice. We Mauritius would get this opportunity for one of our members, which were born there, explain how she had been suffered, how she had been traumatized, how she had lost her baby. She was pregnant for 4 months, and explain to all the assistants, to all the country present. And with that, we got the support. It's not only the issue of sovereignty, but it's the issue about human rights. What we say, we always said, even Mauritius, we said that Chagosians need to have the word to say. We need to be as stakeholders. This is why we say to Mauritius, we don't want anyone to discuss on our behalf. We want to be represented because we are represented for Chagosian native. We need to have our place in every negotiation, in every discussion about the future of Chagos.
So are you not part of the negotiations with Mauritius?
Unfortunately, what is going now, it's only UK and Mauritius. They say they are negotiating about sovereignty because there is some confidential issue that is being raised. We say, but I had to be frank, we have consultation with the Prime Minister, but we are hoping more than that. We need to be involved in any discussion to know what will be our participation, what will be we have our own idea, how we want Chagos to be, you see? This is why we are asking for this permission.
Chris?
Hi, Chris Matlock, Al Jazeera. How many original residents are still alive? You know, to be blunt, people are dying off. And maybe in another 20 years, 30 years, there's gonna be no one left. Do you know how many original residents are still alive? And what do you feel about the governments can just wait you out? They've done it for 50 years.
You're right. Up to now, we have about 450 Chagosians still alive on a total of 3,000 people. That means that, let me tell you, the last born on Chagos is 50 years old, and the older is about 98. That means that it's true. They are waiting. It's the case for UK government. Why it's just giving opportunity to our young descent to come to UK. We are not against that. But before I learn other culture, I need to know my own culture. I need to teach it to my children. How could they say that they want to promote culture? But what about our culture? They want to destroy all. We don't to give this opportunity to our young to just know about our culture. This is the most important things. And of course, if I am here, I'm talking on behalf of all Chagosian native, because there is something need to be done for those who have been suffering. And this is why the reason we are here. We say that reparation need to be done, apologize need to be done, and of course, starting by Chagosian who had known or who had faced with difficulties. No one can say that more than us as native.
Laurie, you want to say anything?
Well, I think you make a good point about the governments wanting to wait this out, but the fact is that there are descendants of the people who were forcibly deported. So this question isn't going anywhere. The Chagosian people will continue to exist. The tragedy of not being on their island will continue. But I think the idea that the governments can wait it out is a flawed one. I mean, look at the CARICOM plan for reparatory justice. There are no descendants alive today who were enslaved. Sorry, there are no people alive today in the Caribbean who were directly enslaved, but the British Caribbean islands are largely made up of the descendants of the enslaved. And the legacies of slavery can be seen on those islands today in terms of underdevelopment, in terms of health legacies of obesity, diabetes, and hypertension. So the issues don't go away, the injustice doesn't go away. And in the case of the Caribbean, you now have the problem of climate change, that nobody asked to be dumped on these islands in the middle of the Caribbean, and now they're dealing with rising sea levels and storms, which literally threaten to turn a natural catastrophe into a debt catastrophe, which is why you see the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Motley, calling for the Bridgetown Initiative and for the issues of debt and climate change and development to be revisited so that these islands are not wiped out by debt. So the issue isn't going away. The pain of Olivier not being able to visit his parents' graves becomes the pain of the grandchildren who cannot go to their grandchildren's graves. Death does not eliminate the injustice, it remains. So I think the idea that this will go away is merely wishful thinking in official quarters.
And just to add that the Chagosians are an indigenous people, and therefore that really reinforces that the right to return is for each individual, but it's for the whole people, and that will go through the generations to each Chagosian anywhere in the world who wishes to return. And certainly every Chagosian we spoke to of each generation said they wanted the right to return, and that would be, they choose whether to return depending on what the situation was. And that's the same for all forms of reparations, that's for the people. And if a negotiation settlement is announced this year, as it may be, there may be an attempt, say, by the UK to say, well, we've dealt with this, but if there's not a full settlement with the agreement of the Chagosian people, then this issue of reparations will continue.
Thank you, Carrie Naughton from Le Monde and Radio France Internationale. We're at the UN. The UN has played a huge role during decolonization, right? What are you expecting from the UN? What could the GA, I know the GA decision in 2019 is not, cannot be enforced, but what are you expecting? What could the GA and also the Secretary General do very concretely to help the Chagosian people now?
What we are hoping, mainly from the Secretary General and the United Nations General Assembly, to abide to the decision, mainly because, you know, the matter after the vote taking place in the United Nations General Assembly, this had been referred to the International Court of Justice, and there is an advisory opinion. Even it's not binding, but we have also a judgment of the International Tribunal of the Right of the Sea, who say clearly that the right is for Mauritius, and what had been done, and we take notice of one of the among those judges who say clearly that reparation need to be done, and still now nothing. And as I said, you know, the resolution was presented by the Prime Minister of Mauritius on 22nd of May 2019. And it's normally November 2019, they should stop the illegal occupation. And this had continued up to now. It's only last year that we go to Chagos with the Mauritian delegation, where we just find out how it is, and it was the first time that we go without any policemen, soldier scope, you see. And now I think that it's a duty of the Secretary General and the UN General Assembly to find out a solution and to allow our people to return, because we are not terrorists. We want security, but give us the chance, like all human beings, to be able to live on our birthplace, because it's our wish, it's our rights that everyone should respect it. This is what we ask, not just if someone did not fulfill their responsibility. It's the responsibility of the Secretary General and the United Nations General Assembly to put it in front of his responsibility. What we are hoping.
I mean, if I could just say something about the UN process. As a UN correspondent, you know the UN's platform for highlighting global injustices in many ways, and I would just note that next year is the end of the decade of people of African descent. The Chagosians are descendants of enslaved Africans. There is an opportunity there to highlight this issue, I would say, in that.
Such optimism about the United Nations General Assembly.
And also to add that, as mentioned, the history of the Chagosians, the deportation by the UK, the entire population from every island, was so the UK would avoid reporting to the UN about its rule over colonized people. And this was done to deceive the UN, as the documents show. And there's a whole extraordinary history there. So the deportation began with the UN, with the UK's relationship. And what could happen now is that the Secretary General, the General Assembly, and other parts of the UN should really be speaking out for the Chagosian people in these negotiations to ensure that any settlement respects the rights of the Chagosian people. And specifically, the International Court of Justice opinion gave that responsibility to the General Assembly to say the rights of the Chagosian people should be taken up by the General Assembly, so they have a specific duty right now.
Yes, Stefano Vaccari, La Voce di New York. Well, I think this is not anymore about who is right or who is wrong. We clearly know who is right in this issue. It's a matter of outside there in the world, especially in this country, nobody knows about this situation, right? This crime against humanity. So did you think in the past or in the future to meet, I don't know, Martin Scorsese, a Hollywood director, and have him a movie that could go through, could make this country, especially that talks always about human rights in this building, push their government to act?
Yeah, this is what we are, the reason we are here, because we just want to have more awareness, because as you say, we know that many people in this country, mainly United States, don't aware of our situation. It's only know that there is a base on Diego Garcia, but they do not know that both governments, UK and US, lied to the world to say that before the installation of the US military base, there were not population there. And they are well aware when they decided to come to Diego Garcia, they all found that there are a civilian population living in peace and harmony. This is something that we just want people to know. This is one of the reasons we want to have more media coverage, and you are the one that I think it's very important for us to just spread our message to the world, because we want people to know more about the situation and to know where is the responsibility of both governments, UK and US. Without the US military base, no problem, we will still living in Chagos. But because of the base, and there is instruction who have been given by the US to UK to remove every people from the base, from the where they were used to live. There is also something that have been done just to not allow our Chagosian people to return and to live. There is many ways, and this is why our demand is exactly concerning US, UK, and even Mauritius also have to shoulder their responsibility toward everyone. We are not supporting of anyone, but we say we don't want what happened in the past, because it's good to let you know that decisions have been taken without any consultation from Chagosian people. And it will not be the case. This is why we want to be part of any decision concerning the future of our birthplace.
Yvonne, can I need a mic? Asking you, Chagos.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this briefing. Olivier, I have a question for you about the next generation. Your kids, perhaps, or your nieces and nephews, do they feel Chagosian? Do they have a strong connection to their culture? Have they been able to explore it in any way? Or do they feel that they can actually fit in another culture now? And how do you discuss these things with them? What kind of conversations do you have? And my second question is, what kind of reaction are you getting from these governments, from the US and the UK? This question is for all of you. I wonder, Laura, if you walking down Whitehall, whether they close the shutters when they see you coming, because you have made quite some impression, and people know that your story as a result of the publicity that you've done. Is it a question of raising the stakes now, ratcheting up the pressure, say on the royal family, like you mentioned, to create perhaps an embarrassment and prompt action on that front? Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, I have to reply to the first question. We are very concerned about to promote our culture, because we want our young generation to know more about the culture. For example, we work with Edinburgh University on a project calling Heritage Acquisition, which we did concerning our traditional meal, our all the type of living, about our music, about our medicinal plant, that we share how we used to live on Chagos, and we want to we had shared between our young generation. But we have to say also, with what UK is doing, as you always done, devise and rule, they just only want what I said, you know. How could we accept that you want me, you invite me to come to dinner at your place, to overstay at your place, but you prohibit me to live where I was? This is something that they are doing, but I'm not against that. And said that if there is any opportunity for Chagosian descent to go to UK, to just have more education, more for training, and then get ready, but never forget, never give up your fundamental right to live on Chagos Archipelago. This is why we have to face that, but we continue to give encouragement to promote our culture, because as every people, we have our culture, and you know, if a people without culture, it's like a tree without roots. We don't like this. We just want to recognize our culture. This is what we have been able to do, to present a plan to UNESCO to recognize our Segatambu as something that a world heritage, which we are very proud. And this happened on the 10th December 2019, where the same day we celebrate the human rights. And this year will be 4 years. We continue to, we have our claim about our rights to return, our fundamental rights, but we have to rest assured that we have something concerning our culture that need to be taken into consideration.
Thank you for the question, Yvonne. I mean, Olivier's here today to tell the story of the Chagosian people, and the only power one has in this situation is to consciousness raise and to tell the story. And the story here is so horrific. As one of your colleagues said, there's no disagreement that what happened was wrong. The question is, what is the remedy and what is acceptable? And I think the thing that I learned in 30 years at the BBC is that the power of storytelling is all important, and especially in this era of fragmented media, of a fragmented culture as well. But the one thing that does punch through still is a story which is true and is well told. And in a sense, the Chagosians encapsulate this, just the trauma of it, of displacement. Every one of us can relate to this horror and this ongoing horror. And I would say, you asked, do I feel like anybody is listening in Whitehall or in Buckingham Palace? I would say yes, because the particular perspective that I and the 100 other families who've contacted this group Heirs of Slavery that I helped to launch in April, which is all people who are descended from enslavers in the British Caribbean, that lobby, people in the Caribbean encouraged us to come forward and said, there's been a deafening silence from the descendants of enslavers until now. And if you come forward and set an example, it will broaden the conversation, it will widen it out, and you can help to amplify the Caribbean's 10-point plan for reparatory justice. So that's how I see our role, and I see that that has shifted things in Britain, because just the manifest unfairness, like the Chagosian situation, the fact that in 1834 it was the enslavers who got £20 million in compensation. It wasn't the enslaved. They got nothing. Even though in Parliament in 1833 there was a suggestion, should we pay reparations to the slaves? And that was promptly shot down. No, we need to pay off the West India lobby. What are they going to do without their slaves? This was the thinking. But the fact that almost 200 years later, families like my own may not have the wealth anymore, but we have social standing, we have social privilege, we have the ability to make a noise. Again, it's part of the unfairness. And I would say this British government clearly is not going to apologise for slavery, nor is it going to engage in reparative justice. I hope it does with the Chagosians. But the next British government, it could be different. If there is a change of government in Britain next year, if there is a Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, who's a child of the British Caribbean, he's Guyanese, British. Could that government do what the Labour government wouldn't do in 2001 at the Durban Conference and apologise for slavery and begin a discussion about reparatory justice? I do think the climate emergency has changed everything and scrambled everything, and the responsibility of the former colonial powers to address the horror story unfolding in the Caribbean, where these islands at sea level now are just one hurricane away from financial disaster. It means that there's a responsibility for the former colonial powers to invest in climate resiliency at a minimum. By the way, the developed world is also producing climate emissions which are making the situation worse for these islands. So there's a double responsibility. And with the King, as Prince of Wales, he clearly laid down a marker that he's thinking about this in a way that the Queen could not. He talked about deepening his understanding of the atrocities of slavery. He said this is a conversation whose time has come when he was Prince of Wales in Rwanda at the Chagos Summit. He is supporting academic research into the royal family's links to slavery. He's clearly laying down markers, but he's a constitutional monarch. He can't do what the government of the day won't allow him to do. So again, maybe a space will open up for him in the next year if there's a change of government. He's shown that he's a thought leader on the environment, and he has the ability as head of the Commonwealth, Supreme Governor of the Church of England, to follow the example of the Church of England, which he technically leads, and apologise. So I'm hopeful that change is coming, but I hope that Olivier and the Chagosians don't have to wait very much longer. And I hope that they can lead the way, because they are a microcosm of the wider reckoning which is happening in Britain and in Europe about colonialism and empire. The Chagosian story is one of colonialism. The French brought enslaved Africans, and the British then later brought indentured servants to the Chagos Islands. It's all part of the same story, and it's playing out in different ways. So I think it's hugely important that you all use the platform you have to tell this story of the Chagosians and to help bring justice, because journalists can shine a light. That's the power that you have in this world, as you all know.
This is, I can say this is one of our main objectives, to have more media coverage, because without media coverage, it will be difficult. At the time we started with legal procedure against British government, it was the case that we have some legal media coverage. This is why, the reason why. We take this opportunity during the visit of our delegation to come to give interview with many press media, and then just let them know about the situation, and because awareness for us is so important.
Have you requested to meet?
Hang on, Clive, just
No, so just briefly on the engagement with the governments. In the Human Rights Watch report, we set out letters we got from each of the three governments when we asked them earlier this year. The government of Mauritius engaged. They then said at that time that they accepted the right of Chagosians everywhere in the world to return if they regained physical and legal control over the islands. We're still concerned what they would do. The Prime Minister of Mauritius recently was talking about the rights of Chagosians of Mauritian nationality, which seems to narrow it down, and for the reasons Olivier set out about being concerned. So it's ensuring that Mauritius will not become part of the problem of the crime. The US has hidden behind the UK for 50 years, and their response to us was to say this is a responsibility of the UK, which it is, but it's also the US has played such a key role in creating this. And today, the base will continue, will be for the US to decide if it supports or opposes the return of Chagosians to Diego Garcia. But significantly, when the Human Rights Watch report came out and it got attention in the Washington Post and elsewhere, the US government for the first time acknowledged its regrets for the manner in which the Chagosians were treated. And that's the same language the UK has been using for some time. It's some distance from a full apology, but it's a start. So there's at least a beginning of a public acknowledgement. It's bringing the US role into public is one key part. And for the UK, they said they don't recognise the description we gave as crimes against humanity, but they don't dispute the facts because they can't. This is documented. They've acknowledged their regrets. And it is, if by any legal definition of forced displacement, this was forced displacement, so a crime. But what's been significant was not just the opening of the negotiations with Mauritius after denial for decades, it was the UK itself, the Foreign Secretary, has said that resettlement of Chagosians is on the agenda. They've acknowledged that publicly. Maybe restitution of the islands is on the agenda too. We're not sure of that. So there's some shift behind the scenes, less so in the public discourse about the crimes.
Final word, Carrie?
Sorry, very quick question. Out of curiosity, have you requested to meet the new US ambassador here at the UN, because these themes are dear to our hearts?
Unfortunately, I've not been able to meet today. I would like to meet because I have a meeting with State Department where I've just explained all the suffering of our people and what we are hoping about reparation, about the responsibility of US concerning our situation. And I also mentioned about apology to be done to Chagosian by administration, by Biden administration. I just raised all the issue, and they said to me that it's the first time that they hear from Chagosian. Because every time we have people who work on our behalf now, it's we. I'm here. I myself, I was born there. I am a Chagosian, and now I will be next year 60 years old. I've been uprooted at the age of 4. 55 years I've been living in exile, and my objective, I just want not only to give this opportunity only to my children, to all the children of Chagosian descent, to be able to live, to know the place of birth of their parents. This is the main issue, because if there is possibility for others, why not for us?
Also the president of the General Assembly, the new president, Dennis Francis, he's from Trinidad and Tobago, who maybe could be very receptive to this issue.
Of course, we will never refuse this kind of possibility. If there is anyone who just can arrange something for us in order to explain our situation, this is why I'm here. I would be loved to make it. I would like to make it because it's our concern to give more information about what we have suffered, and we want to put an end to the suffering of our people. It's time to do it now.
It's also time for us to wrap this conversation. Did you want to say anything briefly?
Yeah, just to respond to these last points, which I think are really good. This is Olivier's first foray in the UN space. This is the beginning of what we hope will be a long and productive conversation that will end in the right way. The General Assembly has laid down a marker. We will be requesting these meetings, so this is laying the groundwork. Next time that Olivier is here, we will hope to meet with the Secretary General or his team, with the President of the General Assembly, with the US, the UK. So this is the beginning of something that should have been dealt with a long time ago, but hasn't. So this is the opening, statement, as it were, and watch this space.
Hopefully not a long, productive conversation,
Hopefully
a short,
it will be,
productive conversation. I think that's the point.
Yeah.
Laura, final word? 30 seconds.
Oh, well, just to say it's an honour to be here with Olivier, and I just think that the story is what Olivier said. For 55 years he's been living in exile. He's unable to visit the graves of his parents. It's a human tragedy, an ongoing one, and there is a resolution which is clear, a right of return to Chagos, an apology for what's happened from Britain's government and to some degree the US, and reparations for the damage. And I would just say that, again, it's part of a wider picture, part of a wider reckoning over the impact of colonialism and empire. The fact that the Chagosians originally are enslaved Africans brought there by the French. Nobody is there out of choice. And now there's this double diasporization that's happened by force. And it's very painful, but we need to acknowledge it.
Clive, final word.
And we've heard something of the story of the Chagosians, which is one of crimes against humanity, but also of struggle and inspiration. And I first met Olivier 20 years ago when he was taking on the UK authorities in courts and winning some of the time. And I think this year and the next year is absolutely critical for the future of the Chagosians. And it may be when finally the Chagosians have the right to return home, but the UN itself has to play a major role in that.
Well, I've certainly learned so much from this conversation. My thanks to Olivier Bancoult, Laura Trevelyan, and Clive Baldwin, and for the collaboration from Human Rights Watch. Thanks, everybody. No.